Hello and welcome to a webinar organized by ELIAMEP's Turkey program and the Istanbul Policy Center, aiming to present the results of the fourth wave of the series of opinion polls organized in Greece and Turkey at the same time. My name is Ioannis Grigoriadis, and I'm a associate professor and Jean Chair of European Studies at Bilkent University, and the head of the Turkey program at ELIAMEP. I have the pleasure to introduce to you some experts, some persons who have been involved in this survey, who are going to provide their comments on the current state of Greek-Turkish relations as viewed by the public opinion of both states. Let me highlight here that these surveys were held in November, so before the earthquakes in Turkey and the tragic train accident in Greece, which has reshaped the field in the bilateral relations to a considerable degree. But we will discuss this in detail later. Let me first give the floor to our speakers. First will be Vangelis Areteos, who is a research fellow at the Hellenic Foundation for European and Foreign Policy and distinguished journalist. Then I will be presenting a part of the survey regarding the kind of ways that the two public opinions look as suitable for the resolution of the disputes between Greece and Turkey. Then we will have Professor Evren Balta from Özyeğin University, who will be looking into foreign policy perceptions that appear dominant in the two countries. Professor Balta is also a senior scholar at the Istanbul Policy Center. Then we will give the floor to Professor Sanem Aydin-Duskit, who is a professor at Sabancı University, as well as the Research and Academic Affairs Coordinator at the Istanbul Policy Center, ELIAMEP's partner in this initiative. And then we will conclude our presentations with Professor Denis Sert, professor and Zamona Chair in the Department of International Relations at Özyeğin University. This is a very tight schedule because we plan to finish within 60 to 70 minutes maximum. So I will ask our speakers to be brief so that we have the opportunity for questions and answers and a brief discussion towards the end of our event. Thank you very much. So the floor goes to Vangelis first.
Thank you very much, Yannis. Thank you all. I will first start commenting a bit the data concerning the relationship between Greece and Turkey through EU, especially the support or opposition to Turkey's EU membership, comparing Greece and Turkey. So what we've seen from this data is, first of all, a very big discrepancy between Greece and Turkey when it comes to Turkey's EU membership and its support. What we've seen is that in the Greek part, whereas in 2021 the support to Turkish EU membership was already low, it was at 20.2%. In 2022, it went even lower to 13.5%. And this can be explained from other data we have, and we have seen the last period that there is this perception in the Greek public opinion, first, that Turkey is not a country ready to enter European Union because of mainly democratic lacks that the Greek perception sees in Turkey, and also especially the Greek-Turkish relationships, who have been going through a very hard time, but also because there is an overall perception in the Greek public that the EU is favorably supporting Turkey when it comes to the disputes between Greece and Turkey, that the EU is taking a positive part with Turkey. On the other hand, when we see the results in the Turkish side, we see something which is also very interesting and a little bit worrying, is that the support of the Turkish public opinion to Turkish EU membership went down from 53.6% in 2021 to 43.7% in 2022. So 10% lower, which can be explained mainly because of all these tensions the last period coming from the dominant narrative of the government, which is frankly anti-European and anti-Western for the last period, and also because there is a very big disappointment from a very important part of the Turkish public when it comes to the EU. Well, the other important thing that we see in these data is that when it comes to the people who say they don't answer or they don't know, they have no opinion, there is also a very big difference between Greece and Turkey, because we have for 2022 5.2% of Greeks who don't answer and say they don't know, while this rate it goes up to 10.4%. For the Turkish public opinion, which means that there is also a lack of information and of knowledge. When it comes to the question of if the Turkish membership to the EU, I mean its process towards the EU, has made solving disputes with Greece more difficult. What we've seen is very interesting also, and not very positive, is that 40.9% of Greeks think that this process has made the solving disputes more difficult. And this is again this perception of the Greek public that the EU is not supporting enough Greece, and it actually that the EU supports Turkey. While this, to the same question, the rate from the Turkish public opinion is only 30%, which is normal in the sense that the Greek-Turkish disputes, despite the fact that the last period have become more visible in the Turkish public, they are still not a very important problem. Now, this also we see that this perception that one country is supported unfairly and unconditionally from the EU against the other is very interesting, because we see that while in the Greek public opinion this is a very important rate, almost 1 into 3 Greek citizens believe that the EU that Turkey enjoys unconditional or unfair support from the EU against Greece. This rate goes up to 57.5% concerning the Turkish perception, which means that there is a very dominant idea within the Turkish public opinion that the EU is an unfair international player, and that it supports Greece against Turkey. And this is a very problematic, eventually problematic perception when it comes to solving the issues through the EU in the eyes of the public opinion of Turkey. Now, when it comes to the Cypriot problem, now this is rather interesting again, because we have some differences that show that the different narratives have produced the results in the public opinion. So, in the question of if the solution of the Cypriot problem should be based on the federal bi-communal state, that means within the framework of the United Nations, we have 55.8% of the Greeks who believe that this should be the frame. Whereas for the Turkish public opinion, this goes down to 32.5%. Here we should note that the rate of the Greek side is also, despite the fact that it's 55.8%, it is very low concerning the general perception of the Cypriot issue. And this shows also that Greece the Greek public opinion is shifting towards eventually a different way in solving the Cypriot issue. Now, when it comes to the question if the solution should be based on the logic of these two separate states, which is something that the Turkish government has brought up the last almost couple of years, then we see that the Greek public opinion is favorable to this kind of solution by 28.3%, whereas the Turkish public opinion goes up to 42.3%. And again, despite the fact that 42.3 is a significant rate, when we compare it with all the efforts and all the narrative of Ankara that this should be the solution, we see that this is still low, which is hopeful eventually if one day the UN decide to come up with a new process of solution. What is also interesting is that when it comes to those who don't answer, they don't know, we have 15.8% of Greeks who say that they don't know or they don't answer, and 25.2% of Turks who say the same. Very high percentages, especially the Greek one again, because Cyprus used to be a very sensitive issue and everybody knew about it, everybody was talking about it. Now we see that this 15.8% of the people, they don't know, they don't answer, which means that in the eyes of the Greek public opinion, the Cypriot issue has become less important. I think that this is, for now, what I have to say. And of course, I will be glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Vangeli. You were in time as well. So I will take on and try to explore some of the findings regarding the views of both public opinions regarding how we should move forward. How should these disputes be resolved? I think it's important to stress here that this series of opinion surveys started following this sharp escalation of bilateral relations between Greece and Turkey. And what we observed from the very beginning is that the public opinion on both sides didn't follow this track. The public opinion answered in a more mild and moderate manner, despite this inflammatory rhetoric that appeared often on the media of both sides. So, and in that respect, although we've been witnessing over the three surveys before this one that we're discussing, a slight decline of the support for moderate or diplomatic or non-violent views, solutions in the disputes between Greece and Turkey, it is important to stress that the public opinion remained largely committed to peaceful ways to resolve the outstanding disputes. So in that respect, and I think that's a very important point to keep in mind, since we're maybe discussing towards the end the current state of affairs and the recovery of the relations in the last couple of weeks following the earthquakes, we can say here that in a sense, the governments follow the public opinion. So the discourse of the governments is aligning with the views of most Greeks and Turks that have not been kind of convinced by the rhetoric of the previous years on how the issues should be resolved. So as I said already, there is a majority of those who support non-violent methods for conflict resolution, strengthening of diplomatic and political relations appears to be the most popular way to move forward in the Greek side. Engaging international organizations appears to be very, very kind of popular. Views that look into economic relations are also more significant in Turkey than in Greece, which is quite interesting. And then mediation or strengthening cultural relations appear also as possible answers. Of course, there are those, let's say, more pessimistic or sort of more cynical in their views that think that only sanctions can work in that relationship, but these are not the majority in Greece and in Turkey. It's 30.2% of Greeks who answer so, 19.5% of Turks that think in the same way. What is also interesting looking into the data on the Greek side is that the more moderate views are to be found in the center of the political spectrum. So the more we move to the extreme left and the extreme right, we see more pessimism or more mistrust against Turkey. And this mistrust appears to be particularly strong when we move to the far right. But it is interesting to see that it is the center of the political spectrum that appears to be more ready to support policies that promote conflict resolution through dialogue or through negotiation. Another important point that I think is worth mentioning refers to how both sides look into their government policies. We see an overall support for the government policies of each country on Greek-Turkish relations. So they think that their governments, both Greeks and Turks, think that their governments are doing a good job on this, by and large. However, there is a split view regarding the overall evaluation of their country's foreign policy. So while performance in Greek-Turkish relations may be a strong point when it comes to the country's foreign policy, the Greek and Turkish public opinion appeared unconvinced about whether the foreign policy of their respective countries is moving in the right direction. Another important point that I would like to stress refers to concerns about a military confrontation between Greece and Turkey. This appears to be embedded in the Greek public opinion, but not present, not as strongly. It's a weak perception in the Turkish side. This is an interesting finding that, of course, could be explained possibly, and we can discuss this later, maybe in the questions and answers, because of the fact that Greek-Turkish relations occupy a disproportionately large segment of the Greek public discourse and the Greek foreign policy discourse compared to Turkey. While Greek-Turkish relations are almost on a daily basis on the Greek news agenda, Greek-Turkish relations is a secondary issue on Turkey's agenda, which is occupied by flagrant and very urgent domestic and foreign policy issues. So this is an interesting point of kind of discrepancy between the two sides. Again, we can see that the more to the center of the political spectrum, the less the fear of a military confrontation with Turkey. Again, moving to the far right shows us that these fears are higher. And I would like to conclude my brief presentation by stressing that what I said in the beginning of my short intervention as well, that as we're witnessing now recovery of the diplomatic relations between Greece and Turkey, very interesting developments have happened in the last couple of days. Greece and Turkey have agreed to mutually support their candidacies in international organizations. Greece aspires to become a non-permanent member of the Security Council. Turkey aspires to acquire the position of the General Secretary of the International Maritime Organization, and they promised each other support. There is a new opening with the so-called positive agenda, all this sort of discussions about confidence-building measures and ways to bring the two civil societies closer are under operation right now, which is something that was not really in the cards until the terrible earthquakes that hit Turkey in early February. So my point is that this sharp shift can be possible because the public opinions appear ready to endorse this. So it is really the discrepancy between the public rhetoric and the reality in the public opinions that was, let's say, interesting or hard to explain. So what we're witnessing now is really what brings a harmonization between the views of the public opinions and government policies in the bilateral relations. So thank you very much. I will now give the floor to Professor Evren Balta, who will talk about foreign policy and how both public opinions look into this issue.
Hello, can I share my screen? I'll just show you some figures. You do see them. Okay, so let me first start by saying that, as Ioannis already told you, this is the fourth wave of our survey, and we are currently about to conduct the fifth wave. And each survey, we basically ask the same questions that we asked before, and we also have a cluster of questions that we didn't ask before. This time in the fourth wave, our new cluster is migration, and Deniz Hoca is going to be talking about migration. And all the questions or the topics that I'll be presenting to you are basically the questions, are covering the questions that we asked before. Some of them in the beginning of 2021, and some of them at the end of 2021. And as again Ioannis said, this survey we conducted like 4 or 5 months ago. We were planning to present results of the survey much earlier, but because of the earthquake, we needed to postpone. But having said this, again, let me say that I'm going to be giving you some comparative results and how the public opinion has changed in the last 2 years. So let me start with this question before talking about Russia and United States and how Turkey and Greek public opinion sees or evaluates the relations between United States and Russia. This is what I was supposed to talk today, but let me give you the context. We have been asking to the Greek and Turkish public whether they find Greece and Turkey's foreign policy successful. And one of the things that we keep finding is that compared to Turkey, Greek public finds Greece's foreign policy much more, not much more, but slightly more successful than the Turkish public. This is first. I mean, you see there's this slight difference. Greek public sees Greece's foreign policy either very successful or successful, whereas Turkish public opinion thinks that Turkish foreign policy is not that successful. But when it comes to the perceptions of Greece and Turkey in terms of their confidence of their country and their country's ability to defend itself in the event that their respective country's security is threatened by another country, we basically see that Turkish public opinion is compared to Turkey, is a bit higher than Greece. Here you see the results in 2021. Greece public opinion said that they have confidence. It was 59%, and it slightly decreased in 2022. And in Turkey, it's much higher. It was 77% in 2021 and decreased to 72%. So you do see the decrease in both countries is pretty much similar in terms of the percentages. So when we ask about another confidence variable, whether Greece or Turkey is a regional power, both politically and economically, we asked this question 3 times in 2021, beginning of 2022, and then at the end of 2022, both in Greece again and in Turkey. We see again that Turkey's public confidence of Turkey in terms of Turkey being a regional power, both politically and economically, is again much higher than Greece. So both in terms of ability to defend itself and its perception of their own countries as a regional power, both politically and economically, Turkish public opinion is almost like the double in terms of the percentages when compared to Greece. This belief in country. But they do think at the same time, Turkish foreign policy is not successful. So maybe this is a fact that we also need to talk. I mean, where this discrepancy comes from. You have a lot of confidence in your ability to defend the country. You have a lot of confidence, Turkey, as being a regional power. But then when it comes to the foreign policy, then the public says that it's not successful. One of the explanations that we used to have in the previous ways is that what we are presenting to you is basically the averages. But when it comes to the political party affiliation, there's a huge discrepancy in Turkish public opinion. And we see the same pattern here in this last survey as well. The opposition, the respondents who are stating that they would vote for opposition, thinks that Turkey is less of a regional power bloc, but they still think Turkey as a powerful country, and they still believe in Turkey's ability to defend. But when it comes to the practice and in how actually Turkey's foreign policy is conducted, you see this political party affiliation plays a lot of role in the evaluation of the government's performance. So the ability to defend or the feeling that Turkey is a power is widely shared, but in terms of the practices, there is a lot of discrepancy. This is something that we asked, I guess, a year ago to both to Greek and Turkish public. And this was this was right after, but the first time we asked was right after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And we were trying to find out the support, the public support to Russia and United States. So here again, I'm showing you the results, comparative results. I'm sorry, hold on. Both in Greece and Turkey, and in terms of these the alliances between Turkey and I mean between, let me say differently, towards US and Russia. So the first is the Greece part. So we asked to the Greek public whether Russia is supporting Turkey to the expense of Greece. And like a year ago, this was much less, but it increased significantly, like 10%. Right now, I mean, in the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Greek public opinion, half of the Greek public opinion thought that Russia is supporting Turkey. And right now it's 60%, almost 60% of the Greek public opinion thinks that Russia is supporting Turkey. Here is, I think this wording here is incorrect. It should be Russia is supporting Greece to the expense of Turkey. It should be. And that dropped as well. I mean, Turkey, in the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, was thinking that Russia is supporting Greece. But right now, the Turkish public opinion thinks that Russia is not anymore supporting Greece. The same thing goes correct. So you see the shift in the public opinion in the last year with regard to the after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, with regard to the US and Russian support. So I think the second important question is that the US is supporting Turkey to the expense of Greece. So it was 43% according to the Greek public, and again it decreased to 32%, which means that right now Greek public opinion thinks more positively about US support to Greece. Compared to vice versa is true in Turkish, according to the Turkish public opinion. We asked last year, the US is supporting Greece to the expense of Turkey, used to be 62%, and now it decreased to 54%. So you see this last year, you see this shift in Greek and Turkish public opinion. Senem Hoca will also talk about the EU membership process. But here I have some results as well with regard to Turkey's relationship to and the Greeks' relationship to EU and NATO. Let me state very briefly. I mean, in both contexts, what we see is that in terms of the contribution of EU, either EU or NATO, to the solution of Turkish-Greek relations, both publics have more favorable opinion towards EU, less favorable opinion towards NATO. So they do think that, and the percentages are similar with regard to the NATO. Both public opinion, I mean, Greek and Turkish public opinion, shows us that they don't think NATO membership. They do, but the percentages is around, I guess, 30% in both contexts. NATO membership doesn't really significantly contribute to the solution of Turkish-Greek relations, whereas in the context of EU, in Greece, it's around 40%, and in Turkey, it's around 30%. Let me stop share. As I said, let me underline the fact that we have been finding that, and we have been discussing in the last 2 years, specifically for the Turkish side, the averages don't show much because there is a huge polarization with regard to the membership of the EU or NATO membership, relations with Greece, Turkish foreign policy. It's almost, like a divided country in a sense. This is what we have been seeing, and we have been finding that religiosity, which is like as respondents become more religious, they become more conflictual in a sense. more anti-Western in a sense again, and more, okay, I guess that's enough, more conflictual and more anti-Western. That matters. Religiosity matters in evaluating the Turkish public opinion, and also party preference a great deal matters, which are sort of overlapping cleavages in a sense, and also education matters a lot. So these three variables, party preferences, religiosity, and education, is really what shapes Turkish public opinion, and what really differs. What explains that averages are not really telling in terms of assessing how Turkish public opinion thinks about Turkish-Greek relations. Let's stop here. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Evren. I'll now give the floor to Professor Sanem Aydin Düzgit, who's going to explore the EU factor in Greek-Turkish relations.
Okay, thank you very much, Ioannis, and thanks very much for having me on this webinar. Yes, I'm just going to have a few observations, which I thought were, quite interesting takes from the actual public opinion poll. Now, one thing that sort of strikes me is that, of course, EU membership is contested, right? I mean, as Evren also said, I'm going to focus mostly on the European Union and how it figures in all these numbers. But, coming back to my first point, what we see is that membership is contested. Now, it's contested in Turkey, of course, which is, I guess, an expected thing, given that Turkey has a very problematic relationship with the European Union, more so today than ever in the past 2 decades, maybe. But then we see that it's also contested in the Greek context as well, right? If I'm reading the numbers, we see that, people have questions about EU membership. They have disillusionment with the European Union, in Greece as well. Now, of course, one can bring various explanations as to the nature of this disillusionment, and I don't think we can really gouge out those opinions just looking at these numbers ourselves, but I would assume that domestic politics would have something to do with it. Perhaps the EU's stance on the Eastern Mediterranean is not seen sufficiently strong by the Greek public, or something else. But there is some contestation there. Now, of course, having said that, when I look at one of the slides, which is one of the final measurements concerning perceptions on the EU, which kind of, was quite striking, that in the latest round of polls, that's in late 2022, one can observe that the belief that Greece has unconditional EU support from Turkey has declined significantly. So this shows that there has been a disillusionment in the past year or so regarding the Eastern Mediterranean question and regarding how the Greek public perceives the EU and its role in it. So my hunch is that there is this majority perception that the EU has not been doing enough. Perhaps it's because the sanctions that the European Union has adopted towards Turkey seem to be insufficient or very weak. Perhaps something stronger was expected. I don't know what the expectation was, but in any case, it doesn't seem sufficient from a majority of the Greek perspective. Now, in the case of Turkey, I think, Evangelos already has interpreted some of the findings regarding Turkey's perceptions of the European Union. Now, it's interesting, though, that, looking at it from a Turkish perspective, I still find it quite striking that Turkey's opposition to EU and EU membership is still lower than what I would expect, given all the anti-Western rhetoric in the country, especially the anti-Western rhetoric that's been propagated by the government and its pundits for at least the last decade or so, right? So there's a lot of anti-Westernism brewing, and of course, the government has a lot of role to play in it, and the governing coalition right now, but obviously they're not the only culprits, right? We have anti-Westernism of all different sorts and colors, even in the main opposition. But still, and despite the problematic relationship with the EU, where membership is off the radar, we see that, opposition, like strict opposition, is around 20-something% or so, right? And the others are sort of scattered between, neutral to favoring or whatever. So this is kind of, I would say that this means that there is some scope for progress, right, concerning a more positive and a virtuous relationship between Turkey and the EU to take root, let's say, in a post-Erdogan Turkey scenario, in case that's ever to be realized, right? Of course, with the right leadership and with the right rhetoric and discourse, that this might be attainable. And a final thing, and in relation to this, that I'd like to mention is that when we look at the numbers of those people who agree with the proposition that Turkey's EU accession process has made the resolution of bilateral disputes more difficult, the proposition of people who agree, the proportion of people who agree with this proposition seem to be in the minority in both contexts, in both the Turkish and the Greek context. Now, this is quite surprising to me from a Turkish point of view, to be honest. Maybe not so from a Greek point of view, but definitely from a Turkish point of view, as the EU is often seen as a party to the Eastern Mediterranean conflict, rather than an objective arbiter or an objective mediator. So the fact that they don't necessarily agree with this, again, makes me think that, with the right political leadership, with the realignment or reinvigorating or revitalization of Turkey's relations with Europe, an opening might emerge on this front, right? So yes, about 58% of the public still believe in Turkey that Greece enjoys unfair support from the EU, but I guess that's not super surprising. To me, what's super surprising that the rest doesn't believe that to be the case or doesn't necessarily agree with it, right? Despite, again, all the political rhetoric and this, dominant nationalist rhetoric that often flares up the discourse and the sentiment against Turkey, against Greece, or the positions in Eastern Mediterranean, etc. So I think there are certain signs for optimism or for an opening that could be utilized by political actors if and when they want to, make a change. And if they want to sort of change their steps or positions in these conflicts, as well as, not just in bilateral conflicts with Greece, but also in the overall relationship with the European Union as well. So I think I'm just going to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanem, for your presentation. And now I'll give the floor to our last speaker, Professor Deniz Serk, who's going to explore the things of a questions cluster that we just introduced in this latest wave, involving questions on migration and how it's perceived in Greece and Turkey. So Deniz, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to actually look at this new data, which was very bleak for me, to be honest, for someone who has been working on this issue for a long time. Well, you have addressed several new questions here, and the first one was whether people had ancestors who were forced to relocate to Greece or Turkey as refugees themselves. And as you can see from this figure, while almost 45% of the people in Greece has some level of or some number of ancestors coming into the country as refugees, this number is very low in Turkey, like only 2%. And many people in Turkey also mentioned that they didn't really know. So we can more or less say Greece has more of an experience, or the Greek society has more of an experience themselves as refugees, rather, compared to the Turks. And actually, I think which also shows itself up in the following as well. So basically, the questions. I really narrowed this down. The data is very extensive. And it was very exciting for me to have a look at this. To be honest, but when there were like positive opinions and negative opinions grouped here. But when you look at this data, you can see that, for example, for the question whether people born in Turkey or Greece should be given preference over immigrants when it comes to jobs, housing, or healthcare, you can see that compared to the 43.5%, 67.8% in Turkey think that Turkish people should have preference over immigrants in these issues. And this is not surprising because, I mean, in the last few years, I mean, especially since the 2019 elections, when the government has actually lost in the major cities in the local municipal elections, we saw that migration has really become a public issue for the first time. I mean, we have been hosting more than 3.5 million Syrians since 2011, so, I mean, more than a decade, but it has become an issue only recently, and the public opinion surveys that have been conducted in Turkey is also directing to a very dangerous anti-migrant stance, and these findings are also showing a similar trend as well. And also Turkey is going through a quite drastic economic crisis, and so basically the previous researchers' arguments that those people who are competing for the same socioeconomic resources from the government, I mean resources and services from the government, can now not have access to these. Therefore, we might say like these anti-migrant sentiments will be actually increasing in the near future as well. The second question was whether refugees from Ukraine should be treated differently from refugees from Asian or African countries. 33% in Greece said yes. Only 13% in Turkey said yes to this. But to be honest, given our law, it doesn't really make any difference because, as you know, Turkey is a geographical limitation on the Geneva Convention, and Ukraine is still not a member of the OECD, so they will not be treated like a European country. So the refugees coming from Ukraine will most probably not receive a refugee status to settle in Turkey, but they will get a conditional refugee status to be resettled to a third country. By the way, there are almost 7,000 people from Ukraine who have applied to an international protection, to the international protection regime in Turkey right now. Immigrants are generally good for each country's economy. Neither side really believes this, as you can see. The numbers are quite low. I mean, in Turkey, it is also very low. I would like to connect this. In the recent years, I mean, actually, initially, most of the projects regarding refugees in Turkey were humanitarian aid projects. So they were aid-based, need-based projects. Only in the recent years, I would say in the second installment of this 3 plus 3 billion euros coming from the EU, that Turkey has started to implement some development and rights-based projects. And this actually shows us, I mean, this belief of immigrants being generally good for Turkey's economy shows us that these projects are not really providing positive output for anyone. I mean, initially I could say that, especially before the pandemic, I was invited to a new project which tried to create entrepreneurs from Syrian refugees. Almost every week there was a new project going on, but maybe, I mean, the output is simply not there. The other question was whether immigrants were improving the Turkish or Greek society by bringing new ideas and cultures. Again, the numbers are quite low. I mean, in neither of the countries, the public opinion believes that immigrants are doing anything good for their countries. So coming to the negative opinions, immigrants increase crime rates. Yes, I mean, in both countries, the public opinion is very certain of this. In Turkey, more so. I mean, in Turkey, 80% of the respondents mentioned that that's the case. Immigrants threaten the national culture. As you can see, again, Turkey's the numbers in Turkey are quite high. Almost 72% believe that immigrants is a threat to the national culture. Of course, this is very interesting. I mean, when we discuss it through this issue that Evren mentioned about religiosity. I mean, Turkey is a largely Muslim country, and most of the refugees in Turkey are also Muslim people. But as you can see, in any case, they are seeing the immigrants as a threat to the national culture. And so, I mean, that's, I think, a very interesting topic to discuss. And whether immigrants take our jobs away, yes, again, this number, although it is quite low, I mean, compared to Turkey, I mean, Turkey 74%, in Greece only 33% of the respondents believed in this. But I mean, this actually, specifically these graphs shows us that in Turkey, the anti-migrant sentiments are increasing against, especially against the refugees, and which is not a good thing, and which will not be a good thing in the near future either, especially after the earthquake. And I will discuss some of that at the end of these slides. So here, the question was, do you think that the number of refugees in these countries increased or decreased compared to 2-3 years ago? These are grouped. As you can see, in both countries, a majority of the population, in Greece being 67%, in Turkey being 89% almost, believe that the number of refugees in their countries increased either a lot or a little, but it increased. So this shows us that in neither of the countries, the public opinion believes that the governments are doing a good job in actually keeping the numbers low. And I think this was the most interesting of the findings of all, because, I mean, as you can see, the question asks which of these statements about immigrants comes closest to your view. And the first question is really about integration. Basically, it says immigrants should retain their culture of origin and not adopt our culture. And if you look at it, I mean, in Greece, 47, in Turkey, 44% of the people believe that this should be the case. In Turkey, I don't think the reason for this is because they are against integration, but it is because the expectation is for these people to leave. And I think that, I mean, that is also something we should discuss. Maybe in the future surveys, the question of return or like question of durable solutions can be included in the questions as well. So another question that was asked to the respondents here was whether immigrants should be free to decide to retain their culture of origin or adopt the home country's culture. In Greece, 30% believe that that should be the case. In Turkey, only 17% believe that that should be the case, which is also very interesting because, I mean, so in Turkey, people do not want they want them to retain their culture of origin, but they shouldn't be given the free choice. I mean, this shows that they are quite anti-integration in Turkey compared to Greece. Immigrants should give up their culture of origin and adopt our culture. 13% in Greece, 16% in Turkey believed in this. And immigrants should retain their culture of origin and also adopt Turkey's and Greece's culture. I mean, they can, as you can see in both countries, the numbers are quite similar. So, what can we say about this data for the near future? Well, I would say that in Turkey there is a big, I would say, like a negative opinion about the integration of these people into the society. They do not find the projects going on very, very valuable, I would say. I mean, without much of an effect in the economy or the culture. And of course, with the earthquake, my hunch is that things will get worse. How will it get worse? I mean, Turkey had already been going through an economic crisis. As I mentioned, the socioeconomic services that were provided for the same cadres of refugees and those of the socioeconomic status in Turkey are dire. With the earthquake, this actually, I mean, this crisis will be deepened because, as you know, almost 10 provinces of the country were affected, and we will actually be feeling the economic aspect of this in the very near future. And also, the number of crossings from Turkey to Greece might increase, especially when the weather is getting nicer. You know, the spring and summer is coming. These are usually the months or the seasons that we are already expecting increases in the number of crossings through the border. Why am I saying that? Because with the earthquake, I mean, many people had to be internally displaced, and refugees were included. So those Syrians who were registered in one of these 10 provinces, the government, rightfully, I would say, gave them the permit to go and resettle to another city. But they only have 60 days for this resettlement. We do not know what will happen after the month of the Ramadan. So 45 days has passed. So at the end of the Ramadan month, we don't really know whether these people will be able to go back to their previous provinces, or are they planning to stay in Istanbul or Ankara or Izmir, because they have been going to all of these different cities. But for example, imagine that you are a refugee family living in Bolu, which is one of the most anti-migrant, I would say, provinces, because the mayor is quite anti-migrant. I mean, they do not really have much of a future there, because they also do not have any access to earthquake aid. They have to find their own means. So basically, if in the near future, if they feel that they do not have any future in Turkey, so the number of those people who might try their luck in the West might increase. But we still don't know. But I would say in this, and also the worst part is, in this election, migration is an issue in Turkey. I mean, in the previous elections, this was not really the case. But we know that with the emergence of parties like the Victory Party, even the mainstream parties in the country are becoming, or trying to choose more of an anti-migrant rhetoric. So I guess, I mean, in the next, I mean, the opinion is already quite anti-migrant in this November 2022 survey. I think in the coming wave, we will see worse numbers. It will not get any better in neither of the countries. And I will end here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Denise, for these very insightful comments. I think it's important to stress how migration has skyrocketed into one of the key issues in Turkish politics. And maybe it was the local elections, the previous ones, where this became clear for the first time. And as you said, the fact that both coalitions struggling to get to the presidency or to win the majority in the parliament are promising swift solutions of return of the refugees to their home countries without any realistic prospect of this happening as promised, is indicative of what is going on. So it is going to be a very important issue. But this gives me the opportunity to introduce us to the question and answer session, because the one question we have refers exactly to the upcoming political developments in both countries. Both countries are through an election campaign period. They're going to have parliamentary elections in Greece, parliamentary and presidential elections in Turkey. So the question for all of us is whether a government change in Greece and Turkey is going to bring about any catalytic change in the bilateral relationship. I know that this is not something based on the survey data that we have, which reflect the situation in November, but I think it's worth discussing this. Vangeli, what do you think? Can you unmute yourself, please?
All right. When we look at it from the Turkish point of view first, if there is a change of government, I think that it will be a new opportunity for Greek-Turkish relationship, because the new government, after probably a more or less long period of trying to adapt and take control of the state and the bureaucracy, will most likely launch some initiatives to come closer to the EU and eventually to the US. And within this scope, at least the narrative when it comes to Greece will change. And we have seen all those years that narratives play sometimes a decisive role in relationship between Athens and Ankara. Now, when it comes to the Greek side, we know that it is most likely that no party will have enough MPs to form a government on its own, which means that we'll have a period of negotiations, and eventually we'll come up with an alliance of parties, which is not the best thing when it comes to Greece-Turkey relations, not because Greece will become aggressive or anything, but mainly because no one will dare to take a serious initiative and start seriously engaging with Turkey. So I think that we might see a discrepancy there. But if we take into account that if there is a new Turkish government, it needs some time to to really start to govern the country. Eventually, in the same period, we'll have new elections in Greece, and hopefully one party will manage to form a government, and then we can seriously see the perspective of a new process between Greece and Turkey.
Thank you very much. Would Evren, Senem, or Deniz like to reflect on the question?
I can say a couple of words. I mean, the first thing is that I do think a new beginning is important in terms of rebuilding trust. So one of the most important components of the deterioration of Greek-Turkish relations is related to the trust between the two countries, specifically between the political elite. So a new beginning is an opportunity to rebuild the trust through dialogue, through communication. So I think it's an important component, not in terms of the relations between Turkey and Greece, but Turkey and the West and the EU in general, and the US. So this is one thing. The second thing is that if there is a government change, it will be after the earthquake. And the earthquake sort of will see the results. As I said, we'll be doing a survey on earthquake diplomacy. And pretty much the earthquake diplomacy between Turkey and Greece was not as wide, as broad as it was in the 1999 earthquake, but it was there, and it resurfaced this feeling of empathy and the importance of developing bilateral relations and solving the problems between Turkey and Greece. And you do see, if you look at the social media, if you look at other outlets, you see that positive feeling increasing and this resurfacing of the empathy and the positive the climate towards Greece and Turkey. The other thing I think we should consider important, the rhetoric, the political discourse of the opposition is not anti-Western as it is right now when compared to the current government. When you look at the foreign policy program that was announced, it was not the foreign policy program, but the general program of the Table of Six. What you see is that a commitment to EU, a commitment to diplomatic solutions, and also you see really a lot of like underlining the Turkey's Western connection, which is very important in Turkish-Greek relations because it happens in the context of the West, in the context of the EU. So this EU turn problem that might happen, which is more likely to happen if there is a government change, is going to definitely significantly improve Turkish-Greek relations, I think. One more thing, or two more points I'll mention, then I'll stop. The opposition keeps mentioning the importance of the foreign policy style. It's not about the issues, but they do say that we need to change the foreign policy style. It should be more transparent. Turkish foreign policy should be less expansionist. It should be more, conciliatory towards other states' interests, and diplomacy should be mentioned. Foreign policy experts we should bring back the foreign policy experts. We should increase the role of foreign ministry and diplomats. And all those things, again, will have a positive impact. And finally, my last point, if you look at the social support base of the opposition, again, this is something that we have been seeing in our surveys in the last 2 years. The social base of these two the opposition and government significantly differs. The opposition is right now supported by a more urban, educated, middle class groups who has much of a who does support more conciliatory measures and diplomacy, rapprochement with Greece and Turkey. So not only the political discourse of the opposition, but their social base is more, like open to a rapprochement with Greece. I would say I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Evren. We have two last questions, which will bring us to the end of our webinar. One for Sanem and one for Deniz. The same question for Sanem refers to the role of the EU, and in case the opposition wins in Turkey, how strong is the chance that Turkey's relations with the European Union will improve sharply, and how will this influence Greek-Turkish relations? And the question for Deniz, you mentioned that there is a possibility of an increase of the refugee movements towards Greece and Europe because of the situation in Turkey. There was a very low point in the bilateral relations in 2020 when Greece accused Turkey of weaponizing the migration problem on the Evros marriage border. Are we going to see something like this, or is there migration is going to be outside the relationship, given the attempts on both sides to improve the level of their relationship? Thank you. Sanem?
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, I mean, it depends on how you define the word sharply, right? And what you mean by that. Because obviously, here I'm going to speculate, but I would expect Turkey's relations with the European Union to improve if there is a governmental change after May or June. But I would not expect it to improve to the extent that Turkey's membership prospect would be suddenly revitalized, because so many things have happened in Europe in the past decade, and so much water has gone under the bridge that membership possibility, especially after the Ukraine war, now that Europe is contemplating about the accession of Ukraine, a war-torn country, as well as Moldova and even Georgia, that I would say, yes, Turkey could be put in those debates somewhere, but still it would be a far-fetched, bet, given also the economic, societal, political, institutional reconstruction that Turkey would have to engage in. But on realistic terms, what I would expect is for the European Union to lift its veto on certain dimensions of the relationship that remain frozen, and that would be to the benefit of both sides concerned, like, for example, renegotiating the customs union agreement, perhaps talking about visa facilitation in the context, of course, of the deal, etc. And of course, bringing the change in the style of diplomacy, as Erin has just said, I think is extremely important from an EU perspective, making it more transparent, approaching the resolution of conflict through a more diplomatic perspective, and that would, of course, make a difference on foreign policy dossiers. And we know, for instance, right now that Turkey's alignment with CFSP declarations, for example, is very, very low. It's at the lowest of its history. And I would assume also with the change in Turkish foreign policy in other theaters along the globe, that alignment could, again, to some extent, maybe not at the same extent, a decade ago, because there has been multiple shifts at the globe as well, so one cannot expect that. But, some kind of realignment to occur. So I would expect a more constructive and more positive relationship that would, of course, have a more positive impact on Turkey's relations with Greece as well. But I'm not sure about, the revitalization of the whole membership portfolio. That, I think, would take another effort. And one final thing that I want to add is whether or not the EU wants to have increased leverage and credibility in Turkey in a post-election period where there is a governmental change. I think it would have to be much more active in terms of its support, financial and otherwise, to the reconstruction process in the country, to the rebuilding maybe of the country, which will be a very costly endeavor in both political and financial terms.
Thank you very much, Sanem. And now the floor to Denise.
Thank you, Ioannis. Well, basically, 2020 was a very abnormal time. I mean, to be honest, I never imagined the leader of the country is getting online and saying, "Oh, we are opening the borders. You can now cross." I mean, this has never happened before. When my colleagues in Europe asked me about that, much before that, fall 2019, I would say, well, they might turn a blind eye to let people cross, but they would never declare that they are opening the borders, but they did. So, I mean, it was a very abnormal period of time, but the numbers are already increasing, by the way. I mean, like in February, if you check the reports from the border, we see that the numbers being increasing, and as the weather gets nicer, I would say the numbers will continue to increase. Greece, I mean, and also Europe, I mean, in general, the EU in general is keep on complaining that Turkey is using, the migration issue as a very transactional policy area where Turkey is almost blackmailing Europe. But I mean, maybe I jump into Sanem Hoca''s area. But to be honest, Europe paved the way for this itself. I mean, when they postponed the Commission's report on Turkey, just before the elections, earlier when Merkel came and sat on those golden chairs and made a deal with Erdogan, I mean, we already lost, I think, any hope for a better policy option there. And the best thing right now we have is the readmission agreement, which the opposition does not seem to be in agreement, because, I mean, if you look at that document that Evren Hoca has mentioned, I mean, it was a long document, but migration seemed to be one issue that neither the opposition could agree on as well. I mean, they all have very different opinions on how to deal with this issue. Everyone is hoping on, as you mentioned, some kind of a return to Syria, which has never happened in the, history of any of these conflict areas. I mean, you would remember Bosnia was a big case. There was a lot of investment for people to physically return, and there was a lot of funding projects going on after Dayton. And 10 years after, still many people chose not to return physically. I mean, we know we never had positive options. But another concern will be if the opposition does not win in these elections. I know a large number of citizens of Turkey are also planning to leave the country as well, especially those educated, rather upper middle class youngsters will try to find new opportunities outside as well. I mean, I think everybody is I would say, this is our last hope. I mean, this election for the citizens of Turkey. But imagine if the citizens of a country are planning to leave that country, you can imagine those people who only have a temporary refugee status, who are struggling, and almost half of them are now, as I said, double displaced in the country. So, I mean, I don't know, I'm very pessimistic, especially in this issue area. Nothing will get better for neither of the countries, I would say. And EU has to chip in more.
Thank you very much, Denise, for your answer. This brings us to the end of our webinar. I would like to thank our speakers, Denise Sert, Sanem Aydin Düzgit, Evren Balta, and Vangelis Arateos for being with us this evening. I would also like to thank the two companies that conducted these surveys, MRB in Greece and Conda in Turkey, diaNEOsis, who has been supporting this initiative generously. And I would like to thank you for being with us. And please stay tuned for the new wave that is currently planned. And we're going to announce the results of how Greek-Turkish relations have been reshaped following the earthquakes. So thank you very much and have a good evening. Yes, we were almost on time too, although we were too many.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Have a nice afternoon.